Welcome to Psych Sessions Careers, a podcast about how students can identify and prepare for careers that fit their unique interests and how instructors can help. I'm your host, Stacey Spencer. Whether you're a student trying to figure out what you'll do with your undergraduate psychology degree, an instructor who's looking to add to what you're already doing to support career preparation, or an instructor who wants to help but doesn't know where to start, these conversations are for you. Let's talk about careers. Hello, Dr. Aaron Richmond. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for joining me today. I want to start by introducing you to our listeners. For those of you who don't know you, you're at Metropolitan State University, Denver. You're a professor.
Absolutely.
You're a professor, and your department is the Department of Psychological Sciences.
We are. We just switched to that.
Excellent. You are the editor of Teaching of Psychology.
I am. That's one of the hats I wear.
That's one of the hats. Degree-wise, your master's is in what?
Applied cognitive psych.
Excellent. And your doctoral degree?
Is in educational psychology and human development.
Right. So what courses do you teach?
Primarily teach ed psych from a developmental perspective, and those are going to be for future elementary ed, early childhood ed teachers, some K-12 licensed music teachers, some phys ed teachers, and some special education teachers. That's kind of the mainstay of the courses I teach. That's kind of what I was hired to teach at Metro. And then I teach the capstone course in human development. We have 2 degrees in our department. We have a psych science degree and we have a human development and family studies degree. And so I teach the capstone course in that almost exclusively. And then I also, every kind of other year, I get to teach an undergraduate multivariate statistics class.
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I teach that class in a team-based and a project-based perspective. So it's a very productive class, and it's a very, it's almost like a baby intro into grad school class. And I do teach that. I do talk to students as like, this is going to be what grad school will be like, much safer and probably more supportive environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's some misperceptions that graduate school looks like undergraduate, just with a higher degree. And It's so different. And it's very difficult to explain that. For students to be able to experience that is fantastic. And like you said, in a, slightly modified version and
absolutely.
Very safe environment. Before we talk more about your students, I want to talk about all your contributions to APA and STP. You were a part of the guidelines revisions, correct?
Yeah,
you're part of that
for
group?
3.0, yes.
For 3.0. That's exciting. I cannot wait.
I'm
wait
really
for those to come out.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You were part of the Intro to Psych initiative?
I was, yes.
And the Summit on National Assessment of Psychology?
I was, yes.
Like, these are the big, huge things that have been happening that have yielded some incredible materials for teachers. Now, you served on CABE.
I did.
And were you a co-chair? What's the leadership?
Yeah, so for the Committee on Associate Baccalaureate Education for APA, how it's designed is it's split between the associate level faculty and the baccalaureate level faculty. And the very quick backstory on that is that there wasn't a standing committee for baccalaureate education in APA. And it's very hard to get a standing committee. And so there was a committee for associate education, so for 2 years institutions. And they graciously basically gave up their committee and formed a new committee, which is CABE. And so they operate together, but they also have representation from those 2 constituencies. So, like I said, half of it is made up with associate faculty and the other half is baccalaureate. And then the 1 associate and 1 baccalaureate co-chair each year. And so it's a way to really have great representations for those 2 different types of students in schools.
How large is that committee, that group?
The committee, it varies a little bit. I think there is a set number. I think it's 7 or 8. But It's been a while since I've been on that committee. I think the committee has now been around in existence, I want to say, for 7 or 8 years, which is a little sad and surprising that we've only had a standing committee at APA for baccalaureate for 7 or 8 years. But it's good that and a lot of stuff has come out of that committee. Like you mentioned, IPI, SNAP, to a certain degree, it helped with APA Guidelines 3.0. There's the top 20 skills. It does a lot of different things. They're very productive, a very influential committee.
I'm going to have to edit this out. I'm going to need to pause for a second as they take my trash. They use the big arms.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be a couple of bangs of the barrels.
I didn't even hear it.
Yeah, I can hear it loud and clear. Let's just let that happen.
Yeah, we're good.
And then I get to work on my editing skills.
There you go.
All right. Okay, so one of the things that CABE did was established, were we a working group?
We were a working group
for the Skillful Psychology Student.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time we got to work together.
It was, and it was a long time. I mean, it was a group that took a long time to get their tasks done. So long that I was the initial CABE liaison / chair, or however you wanted to say, of that working group, and then I rotated off. Because we did such amazing work that took a long time. And then Dr. Karen Knopfel came in as the CABE liaison and kind of led us through the final stages of it.
Yeah, I just want to say it took a long time because we were quite thorough in our approach.
I agree.
We did have a great methodology. We approached that using 3 very different methods to come to that list of skills. So for people who don't know what the Skillful Psychology Student is, would you like to describe it?
Sure. It's essentially over a course of, was it 2.5 years?
No, 1.5. Maybe.
1.5. Okay. Time, COVID, the whole thing, time is all messed up for me. Essentially a group of us from across the country, from both associate and baccalaureate schools, came together, and we really looked at things like ONET and job skills and workforce readiness skills across all types of jobs. And then one of our approaches was to actually search job ads and look at how psychology skills that we know can be obtained and learned in the curriculum apply to those jobs. And so we ended up identifying 17 skills and across 5 different domains that we kind of grouped them together on. And we described those skills, and then some branch off work is really kind of looking at, well, what do we do with these skills, and how are we going to help teach these skills? And I think obviously this podcast series is about, not necessarily always about the Skillful Psychology Student, but about that topic and about how to help our students and, to be honest, help our faculty this pursuit.
Yeah, I think of the skill development piece as professional development. And so, helping students understand that there are these transferable skills that apply to lots of different jobs, and employers are, interested in things that students may not be aware of, and recognizing that the major is I consider it the vehicle through which you develop those skills. It's the topic you get to enjoy as you're really developing those skills. And there will be students who pursue careers very specific to psychology, but those who don't have so many other ways they can apply their psychology knowledge and skills. And I think that document does a really good job of articulating exactly the skills that employers value. And the 5 domains are representative. And when people see some of those domains, for example, the personal domain is one where people say, oh, time management, integrity, taking initiative, those kinds of things. Like, didn't really think about that. But students work on those things throughout their undergraduate degree.
And I think that document is just as important for students as it is for faculty. And I think that's the big thing. And I can't say it enough about, most of us were trained to teach our future selves, which I think has been a massive error in our education. And so, I mean, I'm sure people have talked about this on the podcast, but the numbers range between 10 and 15% of our students will go on to graduate programs in psychology.
Right.
Another 5 to 10% in other areas. And so we're designing all of our curriculum and our teaching and our pedagogy based on the vast minority of our students. And so I think the Skillful Psychology Student, one of the best things for me is for faculty more than it is for skills or for students. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think there seems to be a fairly consistent and perhaps responsible concern that colleagues have about getting involved with supporting career preparation, thinking that they're not qualified to do so. So on the one hand, it kind of that meets our ethics, right? That you're not going to put yourself out there as an expert on something that you don't know anything about. But on the other hand, our skill set is really in supporting problem solving. We're great problem solvers. And so if we consider I don't like the word problem, but the task is we need to figure out what's a good fit for you as you're exploring these topics in psychology. What really resonates with you? What do you really enjoy learning about? And then these skills that you have, and how can I help you figure out what the best fit will be, which is very different from being the expert on all things you can do.
Right.
And this is a fairly consistent theme in the episodes talking with different people. Is that list, once you get past the 15th item, 20, I think I change the number in every time I talk about this, but 10th, 15th, 20th thing you can do, everyone's eyes kind of glaze over and it feels like too much. And then it begs the question, but what for me? And that is a real challenge. But I do think where faculty are already prepared to play a very important role is with the skills.
Right.
Because we know that students are working on their skills in our courses. What we haven't done as well is make that explicitly clear to the students.
Right.
As learning outcomes. These are the transferable skills. And you'll notice I say transferable skills. I'm not sure if I'm settled on that word, but I'll tell you, I can't stand the word soft in description of skills. So.
Well, I think actually the transferable, I won't say I'm set because everything changes, but as an educational psychologist, transfer is probably the number one thing we should always focus on in our pedagogy. And it's the number one thing we can't figure out how to do, to be honest. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a science concept like Bernoulli's principle, or we're talking about foot in the door technique, like in social psych. Like, I think that getting not just skills, and I think there's also this debate about skills and knowledge, but having that transfer part is probably the key to the success of our enrollment, to the success of our programs, to success of getting grants for our research on teaching in psychology. So transfers for me is a pretty big part. Yeah.
So you like that word?
I do.
You're comfortable with that word. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's the sole focus, but I do think for me, it's the end goal.
I think students to understand that what you're doing in this class transfers to these other situations and other contexts.
Right.
And, it starts with the next semester of courses, and then it goes to other experiences they're going to have. All right. So in talking about career exploration, I'd like to know, the first time somebody asked you to tell them what you wanted to be when you grew up, did you ever have someone ask you that question?
100%.
And do you remember the first time?
The first time. And I've talked about this with Garth and Eric before. I don't think I have a typical, I didn't want to be in academia. So I don't know if my experience transfers, for lack of a better word, to the situation. But I remember when people asked me that question, and it still centers around skills. It still centers around teaching. I think it still centers around gaining some knowledge and skills and using those to a career or a job for sure. But
how old were you? Where were you in your
probably
path of education and work and all those things?
I think I was 13 or 14 years old, probably. I mean, I started working when I was 11, I think. By the time I was 13 or 14, during the summer, I worked full time. And so, over 40 hours a week. And so, I guess I almost implicitly, maybe not explicitly, knew about that idea and those skills and developing those skills early for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I face with students, and I don't know if you have some in the same situation, is that when they were very young, they claimed to want to be a certain thing when they grew up, and it became the family narrative. This is the story of that person. That wasn't really true in my family, but I will say my first time was in kindergarten, and I like Googling images of kindergarten career day. And it just makes me laugh because everything they're expected to show up with the costume. Well, that kind of limits the options. And most job titles that are out there they're just not things that most people are thinking about. When we ask children what they want to be, those are occupational titles. They're not job titles. And I do think part of the career exploration challenge is that when students get to college, they think they're going to leave with an occupational title. And if they don't, they feel like failures. And of course, that occupational title needs to align perfectly with their major. Whatever the major name was, you're going to be that. I call it the fallacy of the is, the ians, and the ers, right? If you're a psychology major, you'll become a psychologist. If you're a history major, a historian, or a math major, mathematician, philosophy major, philosopher. And I think part of that is, expectations for students who come from families, maybe the students who are first generation college students. And the idea of what college is about is a little bit different than what it is. And I do think we need to be working on the alignment between what faculty on the individual level are doing and what the students are there to do.
Yeah.
And we need to meet together. We need to recognize each other's perspective because they need to understand where we're coming from. And we have to remember why they are there. I think we're at an interesting time in higher ed where there is a lot of pressure on us to show that students are leaving. For me, a lot of people tell stories of they run into an alum somewhere 10 years later, and that alum is embarrassed. They say, I'm not using my major. And I tell my students, if that ever happens, my heart will be broken because then I haven't done my job. If you don't understand how whatever you're doing is making good use of even if it's just a handful of concepts, but definitely the skills that you're seeing those direct connections and you feel good about it. Right. That's where I think we're really missing is them feeling really good when they leave and feeling comfortable with what they're leaving with. So again, back to the skillful psychology student and faculty instructors, if they see that list, I think they'll take some comfort in, okay, I got it. We're contributing in those ways. Some of these things I teach content around self-regulation. I teach concepts around self-regulation. They might have a course where they're talking about that. Other things are about problem solving and decision making. I teach a course that talks about those concepts. So the students are leaving with the concepts as well as the skills. So let's go back to talking about your university. Tell me about the overall size, not your department, but the overall size of the institution.
Well, it's funny you mentioned about how universities are changing and enrollments are up and down. We peaked probably 2 years prior to COVID. So somewhere in 2017, 2018, where we're solely undergraduate. We do have a few grad programs and they're developing slowly, but we do not in our department. And we were up to about 23,000. We're now at 16,000. So over 6 or 7 years, we've lost about 35-40% of our students, not necessarily in our department. So my department like I said, has two degrees, and we have about 1,400 majors. We have about 26 tenure track faculty, and actually all but one, maybe two are tenured. So we're a very unique department that way. We have two minors. We have, both the HDFS and the Psych Minor, but we also have a child life specialist. So this is a very skills-based degree.
Wait,
and
you do?
Oh yeah, we developed. So the HTFS, there's a group of 6 of us that's HTFS, and we developed that starting pre-COVID. And we're starting to graduate our first child life specialists. And if you don't know about that program, it's a certificate granting program. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like licensure for teaching. Like they instantly have a specific job that's psych related, typically in hospitals. Mm-hmm. And it's developmentally focused. It's behaviorally focused. And they work with children in hospitals.
They not only work with the children, they're there to support the families, and they work with siblings. I do know a lot about child life because I've had some students go on to child life, and it's really a phenomenal option. It's interesting because you mentioned ONET, which is where occupational descriptions are provided, and they don't. At least the last time I looked, they didn't have child life specialist yet. Mm-hmm. And it's such a great career option. A lot of students who learn about it become very interested in it. The reason I reacted the way I did when you first mentioned it was there have been a couple of people who have brought up that job title. And mm-hmm. I just find it fascinating that there's this theme around this particular occupational path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great program. It's growing fast. The tricky part with those type of certificate programs is the accreditation and the professors / faculty, however you want to put it, and having specific courses for it that mm-hmm. we did have to create. That we had almost all of them, with the exception of 2 courses that we had to mm-hmm. Start from scratch and then find someone to teach them, because none of us within the core HDFS faculty had that expertise.
Right. And then you have to think about placements, right? They would be mm-hmm. there's a lot of hours that are required for them to ultimately get the certificate.
1,000, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it's, we have children's hospitals. So we have mm-hmm. lots of hospitals in different areas. So that was a concern for us about placements, because I thought there was an ethical concern. Is like, we create this program, but then we require our students to go out of state for their internship. Like, you know what I mean? So we had to develop those relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So tell me some other careers that your students are interested in. When they show up and they say, I really want to be a blank, what kinds of things are they talking about? I
mean, I've already mentioned the teachers. So that mm-hmm. they're kind of a group of my students who the Skillful Psychology Student in Skills completely apply to, but mm-hmm. they already have a job. Like they have a job to get out. Like they know exactly what they're doing. So minus those students, mm-hmm. When I teach the undergraduate multivariate stats class, I teach it 95% of those students are going to be grad bound, but I get some students in there that take it to be basically go work for testing companies. Yeah. And so their stats knowledge allows them to be burgeoning psychometricians, and at the baccalaureate level that you can go into alpine testing. And mm-hmm. if you're good at data management and your analyses, and, now I don't use SPSS, I use Jamovi and JASP, which are OER based, but they're point and click. Statistical softwares packages. And so a lot of my students out of that class, I've had a few that have gone into testing companies. I've had a few that have worked in biology labs as the statisticians, and so forth. And so that's one aspect. I think mm-hmm. in terms of other things, that there's this, I don't know how common this is across the United States and maybe even Canada, but there's this mix of human services and human development mm-hmm. And psych. Whereas we have a Department of Human Services and if you look at everybody in that program, 90% of them have a psych PhD of some sort. Mm-hmm. So there's almost this, I know this sounds a little negative, but there's almost this co-opting of psych students into human services, because mm-hmm. they're just teaching psych. And guess what? They're teaching it in a skills-based way with an end job that is very specific. And to be honest, it's something that I think our field has totally missed the boat on. And we should have been doing it 20 years ago, but we were pretty dogmatic and still are very dogmatic in our approach to teaching of psychology. It's very concept-based, which is great because I think that's foundational. But it typically ends there, right?
But it's interesting. It's interesting, not to interrupt. It's interesting how many of those concepts are applicable to everything and so many different careers. Yeah. So, it's not necessarily your job is that concept or those concepts, but that you're using them to be successful in your job. So again, there's skills, but the concepts related to those. Yeah. And so I would agree. Psychometrist came up in another conversation with Natalie Sirocco. It was a job that I pulled for her area, and we talked about that. And what I love about psychometrist is it's not just the data and the numbers. You actually can be doing the assessments. So the students who have that, I'd like to interact with people. I'd like to help with diagnosis. This is a great way to do that because you're actually taking people through the protocol for those assessments. And then, of course, you've got the data from that. You need to interpret the data, writing reports, and you're working collaboratively with the psychologists on that team. So it's a really, really cool job that I think more people should be looking into.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So do you have an introduction to the psychology major and or a careers course in your
We have
curriculum?
A careers course,
okay.
And it's a required course for all majors, both psych and human development. I can't remember. I think it is for minors as well. It's a 2000 level course. And it goes through a lot of different things. And I wish I could teach it actually. But as a big department and someone who's specializing in human development and stats and ed psych, I don't really have the opportunity to teach that course. But we've done a lot of great stuff. Dr. Ansberg, Pam Ansberg's in my department, and Dr. Bethany Fleck. We have a Psych to Learn program that Pam has developed. And then we also have a C2 hub, which is really MSU Denver is a very unique school. We're an open enrollment school. We are a majority minority school. We are a Hispanic serving institution designated. 50% of our students work full time. 50% of our students are first generation college students. So we just have, and our average age is like 26 or 25. It's just a very different. So we have a big focus on career development. And so I think it is a focus. It probably began a focus about 8 to 10 years ago. Something obviously I've been talking about for years. And it's even affected our curriculum in terms of capstone courses, options for internships instead of history and systems. And there's nothing wrong with history and systems, but we have lots of options for our senior experience courses as well.
I love it. So what does it look like for this careers course? How large is the enrollment? How is the course delivered? If you have that many majors, what does that look like?
30. So our average class size is about 30, 35. So it's both face-to-face and online. And it is, it's a 3-credit course. We also have a Thinking Like a Psychologist capstone course that is a kind of extension to it. But that's an option. That's an option for your capstone experience or senior experience. And to be honest, I don't know what it looks like. I've never taught it. And so,
but in terms of the delivery, like if you've got that many majors and your caps are 35, how are you offering all of those sections?
So we have affiliates. So one of the things that is not good about our department, at least in my opinion, is that we do rely on a lot of affiliates. And we have the Human Development and Family Studies has a portion of it. You could basically do it fully online. So it's a degree that you can get online. So we do have, I would say, probably more online sections than we have in face-to-face sections. They do all kinds of things from grad school. And I think, your term is a little more professional development than just solely on careers. I believe they used the Skillful Psychology Student. Not for certain. It's funny when you're a department of my size, sometimes we don't know what each other's are doing. So, yeah.
All right. So let's talk about how you incorporate the career preparation in your courses. What's one example of something you do that has been very effective for your students?
I don't know if they've been very effective, and I should as a scientist and the editor of TOP. And there should be, and this is the shameless plug, I don't care where you send it to, whether it's Scholarship Teaching Learning and Psych, TOP, or PLAT, which is the Psychology Learning and Teaching, and that's mainly Europe, but a lot of US faculty also publish there. But there needs to be a lot more research about the efficacy of these interventions, of these programs. So to answer your question, there's a couple of things. I do something in all of my courses. It doesn't matter if it's an intro course or a capstone course. Some courses lend themselves, I think, a little bit easier. The multivariate stats course, I said I teach it as a team-based and project-based. I've published with 40 students out of those courses on probably 10 different papers and projects. And so in that course, they're doing, they're in teams. They have to work collaboratively. They have to work all these self-regulation skills. So in the cognitive domain, and then also the technological domain of the Skillful Psychology Student. They have to adapt. I was teaching the course during the COVID, and we were using SPSS, and our students are fairly low income. And so when we pivoted online, no one had SPSS. So I had to reteach stats using Jamovi and JAS for the last month of the course. And so they and me or I exhibited flexibility in our technological use really quick. So in that class, we do a lot of the Skillful Psychology just by nature. I think that class is a little easier to do because it's a skills-based course. It's a knowledge-based course too, but I teach it not from here's the calculus behind these stats. I teach it as a functional class. Teach it as a critical thinking class. It's like, okay, you have violation of this assumption and you have a small sample size. What stats are you running? Right. In my capstone course, I borrowed this absolutely wonderful resource done by yours truly, Dr. Stacy Spencer. That's put out by STP. I believe it was a Instructional Resource Award grant. And it's essentially, it really models how we can teach students. And I know you do this over a course of a couple courses, but I do this all in capstone course. And I teach them how to be consultants. A lot of it's through your program and your suggested materials where there's a list of 50 clients. I've actually now changed that list where they can start suggesting their own clients. And then I incorporate those clients for the next semester's class. So I think we're up to 65 different clients, and they're basically these little vignettes. Obviously, Stacy, you know what it is, but I'm explaining to the audience.
To the listeners.
And the client, whether it's a company or a specific person, has a request. And essentially, it's a problem-solving task, essentially. And they work on that client over the course of the class. And that's a big part of the class. And they develop assessments. They develop what's the problem, the consulting the problem assignment, consulting the solution of problem, consulting the solution. How do they assess whether their solution is going to work? And so they go through these series of assignments into an oral pitch and a written pitch. And so it's a very business oriented, applied. It's APA style, but it's in you got to convince me as a client that tired. In that, I also do how to become an HTFS consultant. And that I do a lot of LinkedIn work where I take the Skillful Psychology students. I have students, Skillful Psychology list, and I have students go through those. And this is after a couple lessons on those skills. And I have them basically do a curricular map of their coursework and identify the skills that they think they've learned. And then they go into LinkedIn and they ask me to endorse they make a profile, and I teach them how to make a good profile, not just a proper photo, a professional photo, all that kind of stuff. And then they ask me to endorse specific skills, and they have to basically they do that through LinkedIn, but in a separate email in their request, their formal request in an email, they have to say, well, see this assignment. This is how this demonstrates that skill, right? Or in this problem solving or time management skill. I had this project where I had to meet these deadlines, and I had to have these secondary deadlines to meet these deadlines and so forth. So they basically demonstrate to me, and then I endorse their skills. In that same assignment, they have to create a resume, a professional resume. And at our university, we have in the C2 hub, which is essentially our careers hub, we have the program called VMOC, which I kind of have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with because I disagree with some of the principles. It's an AI program, and I disagree with some of the principles that it's built on. But essentially, it'll instantly evaluate students' resumes, and it'll give them suggestions on what they should do. And so they have a pre-score on their VMOC, and then they have to show, and they have to get to it's called the green zone, which is the good zone. They have to get to a certain score, which I think is 75 or 80 on the VMOC. And then they upload that into LinkedIn. And then they create and that's how they create their profile. So those are some of the assignments that I do at the capstone level.
I love those. For me, I do something similar with the Skillful Psychology Student, and I actually have 3 separate careers courses plus an introduction to the major. So I'm very fortunate in that way. And at each step, they're supposed to be looking at their courses and identify examples, things they've produced in their courses as demonstration or artifacts of these skills. They have to identify the course by name, the name of the project, sort of what the product was. It was a presentation, it was an infographic, and the name of the instructor. And I use that as a way of, when they get to their 3rd or 4th year, I can say, now look back over who has a lot of information across the skill domains. That's the kind of person you want to ask for a reference or a recommendation, because they can speak to so many different skills that you have. And it's that same idea of, it's sort of mapping. I don't call it that. And I'll have them talk to each other and try to figure out, well, where in our courses in this curriculum have we done these things? And I tell them, look outside of your psych courses as well. Mm-hmm. This is not just tell me about psychology, but where are you getting these things? Yeah. And I do have them indicate, did you learn concepts related to the skill? Did you practice the skill? Did you develop the concepts and practice the skill? Yeah. So this is something instructors who are listening could easily adopt. They could just do it for their course. In this course, which of these things did you do? What does that look like? What could I say about those? Mm-hmm. And it also reminds students that you are going to need someone or several people who can speak across the skill domains.
Yeah. And I think that I love that idea. I think the pivot of that, the important cornerstone to that is the faculty showing them how to do that. Mm-hmm. Because to be honest, I don't think I think that's one of those things that I call implicit procedural knowledge. So somehow they're supposed to know how to do it, but nobody's supposed to do it. It's like, tell me the definition of a bursar, right? They don't, yes. Students don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. And I have a PhD, it's such a weird term. And so that leads into one of the other things that I do is with the syllabus, regardless if it's a intro to social psych or human development or whatever, their faculty can map in their syllabi these career skills. Yes. And we've done a little work with that where we're experimenting. Bethany Fleck and I and Steve Barney at Southern Utah University are starting to experiment with some research about incorporating these skills and tying them directly to assessments.
Yeah. Yes.
So, like if I have these things called experiential learning activities, and they are basically skills, they're knowledge to skills-based activities that they typically do in the community or interviews or experiments or whatever the case may be. For each of those, I try to align specific skills that they should be demonstrating when doing those assessments. Mm-hmm. And you can easily put that in a table in your syllabus and say, hey, so you're essentially mapping it for students. And I think that's the first step because it benefits both students and faculty. The students now are aware that, it's not just a comprehensive exam, or I call them opportunities. I got that from Bethany Fleck, and she also stole that from Chris Hakla. It's not just an exam. It's just not just an opportunity. What is it that we're trying to get you to do in that, right? Time management, study techniques, all that kind of stuff, right? Or a check-in, which is what my version of quizzes are. Why am I getting, not what the check-in is. Is it a multiple choice? Is it free choice? Whatever the case is. I don't care about that. I want to describe to students, why am I doing that? And part of that description of why am I giving you 10 check-ins, or actually 12. I'm going to take your best 10 scores. Why am I doing that? Well, this relates to these 5 skills or these 4 concepts, right? And so I think that's a big thing that I think across the board faculty could be doing in every one of their courses. And to be honest, I do a lot of program reviews, meaning I go into typically undergraduate programs, some master programs and doctoral programs. And I do everybody has to do typically a 6-year review. Well, I started doing those, 6 or 7 years ago. Sorry. And one of the things that I don't see, some schools are doing great jobs at it. I won't name them. There's a little bit of privacy there. Some schools are doing a great job of it where they're actually putting in the career skill as a overall curriculum student learning objective. And that's the first step. Then the second step is, okay, if this is a program objective, how do we do that in each class? And it doesn't mean you have to do all 17 skills in each class, right?
Right.
It could be 3 or 4. Like in intro is a good example. What are the skills 90% of our students that we will never see again because they take it for general studies, and that's the national average is 10% of those students become psych majors. So we will never see those students again. What is the skill that we want them to leave with? Sue Franz talked about this for a long time is in intro is what are the 5 things we want them to remember? Is it really action potential? I love action potential, but is that really what we want them to remember? Yes. Or is it parenting style? Or is it foot in the door technique? Right. Or is it the fundamental attribution error, right? Like, I mean, there's some things out there that they probably should remember more than the structure of a neuron. And I love the scientific part of our field in terms of the biological, I shouldn't say scientific, the biological part of our field. But really, what is it about it? We should ask the same question about skills in intro.
I would agree.
What is the skill that they need? Is it time management? I mean, I know Eric Landrum is big on when he talks about APA style. He writes a book about how to do APA style. And he doesn't, and maybe I'm putting words into Eric's mouth, but he doesn't typically care about APA style, but he does care about their ability to follow directions. And attention to detail.
Yes, right. Yes. And it's funny because I heard him talk about that once. I'm like, that's the speech not speech, but that's the point I make with them. In my head, it's a speech, but that's the point I'm trying to make. And I teach students who are most of my students go into healthcare in some way. Right. And I say, if you don't think where that period, let's call it a decimal point, matters.
Right.
And you're training your eye to figure out, did I do this correctly? And also with medications, the difference between generic and name brand in terms of capitalizing it or not. These are details that matter. And I think we can all kind of come up with our own examples of where and I tell them, I don't expect you to memorize. You can look it up. You have to show me that you can match the example with what the information is you're trying to put into that format. Yeah. And I want to see that you can do that. I said, if I were to send a manuscript to a journal and my reference is were a mess. Either they weren't in APA format and that's what they asked for, or they asked for a different style and I sent them APA. There are some people who just say, no, I don't trust anything else that's in here because you miss a pretty basic instruction in our to-do list for submitting the manuscript. And they're shocked to hear that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I can attest to that very situation.
yeah.
And I try to help authors out a lot, but I can only do so much. And I have literally just this last week had a reviewer say, I'm sorry, I think I might be that reviewer. I might be number 2, the reviewer 2, because I got so distracted by the non-standard format of what we would expect a submission to be that I probably influenced my review a little bit. And so I think that's a really important thing. And I think going back to your original question about, what are some of the things, I think if we can get, I think approaching skill development and career development, has to start with backward design. I think it has to start with the program objectives and then spread out, fan out from there. And it should be in every one of your core courses. Ideally, and I remember Susan Nolan talking about this, having a VP for DEI in international for the Society of Teaching and Psych. And I remember her saying her goal would be that there is no such position, that it's integrated throughout all of STP. And I think that's awesome. I think that's the ideal, right? I think the same thing with careers is like, maybe we shouldn't have a careers course. Maybe it should be in every course. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have to take our baby steps. The what about Bob, approach to it. And so I think our first step is doing that curricular map, looking at it, seeing where we can embed these in each of our core courses and each of our elective courses as well. And then formally changing those student learning objectives in those courses that incorporate some part of this development, some part of this professional development.
I would agree. I think if you're an instructor who teaches a course and your students frequently say, I loved this course, what can I do with this?
Right.
And you haven't formulated an answer yet, not to be embarrassed, but say, I'm going to add that next semester and we're going to do that together. Students often ask, what can you do? And there are simple ways. You go to the job descriptions. You have students look for job descriptions. Can you find bachelor level jobs? What would be some master's level opportunities and some doctoral level opportunities that are directly connected to the kinds of things we talked about in this course and the skills you develop through this course? And I think that part of the career exploration part is going to be very valuable because we tend again to think occupational titles. So if you know this, people who teach child development, well, what am I going to be? A child psychologist for many, a teacher, and then, well, maybe I can run a daycare. And there are so many other things that are out there.
Or even in that class, it's funny you choose that class because, to be honest, most of the students in that class are going to be nurses.
Right. So, yes.
Right.
Because it's required for nursing.
What is the skill and the knowledge or concepts out of human development or lifespan or child that they specifically need to apply to their program? So they're getting a job in nursing right after graduation. What part of their job is psychologically based? Guess what? A whole buttload of it, a whole ton of it is psychologically based.
I would agree. I mean, students could even think about the connections between what they are pursuing and the concepts from that course. Yeah. Or you give them a set of occupations and say, well, what is the connection? Why would this be valuable? To that point, you can also have them look through the divisions of APA, one of my favorite assignments, and have them find a division that is relevant to the profession that they're interested in pursuing. And for nursing students, seeing there are divisions in APA that would include really valuable information for nurses and helping them understand professions that way. All right. Well, we have been talking for quite a while, but I have a game I'd like to play with you. So do you have the time?
Absolutely.
All right. So I have 5 job descriptions. We're not going to get through all 5. Your game, the game changes for every guest. Your game, I'm going to, and these are jobs that I found in your area. And I'm going to read a little bit of the description, not the full description. And you're going to tell me, based on the information I give you, is this position a good fit for someone who majors in psychology? And if so, why you think it's a good fit? All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
It's not going to be easy. Well, I think it's going to be easy, actually, but I think people are going to be surprised by these jobs. Okay. A professional development associate. Okay. This person is responsible for collaborating to develop interdisciplinary healthcare team members, developing the healthcare team members, and ensuring successful management of educational activities. They need to be proficient in Microsoft Office and Adobe Suites. They need to have coordination, collaboration, development, and design material skills. They need to be able to design, implement, and evaluate processes. They need to have integrity, emotional intelligence, and be innovative.
Yeah. So
Why?
I think this is, there's definitely jobs that requires a certificate, right? Chemical. My best friend's a chemical engineer. Obviously, there's jobs. Does he use psychology in his job? His dad was my undergraduate mentor at University of Montana Western, and who is a psychologist. And yes, he uses it, right? This job does not sound like you have to have a specific degree. Does not mean there's a certificate granting. You might need to have some experience. But that experience is all attainable by a degree in psychology or human development, for sure. You described skills that we specifically teach, whether it's team-based learning, whether it's project-based learning, whether it is problem solving, whether it is hopefully emotional intelligence and emotional regulation within that self-regulation aspect of the skills that we, not just the concepts that we teach about. We teach about all these concepts. We teach about critical thinking and cognition, right? What we need to do is to teach about how to use these things more than how to, the knowledge of them is the first step, but apply them I guess is right. So absolutely 100%. What's the salary of that job?
It's $56,000 to $84,000 a year. Not bad, with benefits. And you need a bachelor's degree and 2 years of experience. And my comment about this is you don't have to graduate and then get your 2 years experience. Correct. So when students are looking at job descriptions early on, and this is why I do think bringing job descriptions into any class is going to be valuable, is if a student sees something that really gets them excited, that's an opportunity to make a connection for an internship or a part-time job and say, hey, I saw this position. I'm not ready for it yet, but it sounds fascinating. I'd like to get experience, so I'd be ready for that after I graduate. Do you have anything? Right. You just contact that employer. People don't think about doing that. They think there's some master list of internships out there in the world. And a lot of those opportunities are created.
I have to tell you this really brief story. I know we're going to talk a lot, but I just had this student contact me, and she was, we have a IDB program, which is an independent degree. She's making her own program. She worked for Wells Fargo for 20 something years. And she's creating basically a program of financial wellness. And she's using all these psychological principles to teach these programs to people to not just be financially sound and safe, but about the psychological aspect of finances and wellness. I love that. And so she's creating her own classes, and she's like, well, can you give me some idea about what classes to take? And I was like, at first I said, well, we teach an IO psychology course. That's important, but you want to assess this program. So you need to take research methods now. And then I said, well, you probably should take cognition, because there's a lot of really cool, great ideas. And I just went down the line of all these things where this person is creating their own position in life based off the skills and content that they're learning in psychology. They're way ahead of the game.
Absolutely. I love that connection. It's interesting you mentioned research methods. I think most faculty would say that's such a valuable course. And the assumption is because we're preparing people to go to graduate school. But the truth is stats and research methods are valuable across work domains. I don't know that many students who haven't had a chance to work much realize how important data are to every every occupation. People need to understand, what do the numbers look like and how do we interpret those numbers? And so having that skill set is important. The reason I created the consulting model you were describing earlier for my research methods course is I had mostly minors taking that course, some majors. We have a major, but, filling the rest of the enrollment with minors. And I wanted them all to leave with understanding why that research methodology matters for making decisions in their own lives and then decisions they make out in the real world. So the more we can do that for them and make research methods for most majors, maybe a little less about thinking of the research questions that are so specific to psychology, giving them a chance to think of maybe some bigger questions that are for the things they're going to need to answer.
Yeah.
All right. I have another one. This one makes me laugh because the title is Social Media and Pizza Account Executive. The job description actually says, and I quote, "This is a pretty cool job." I loved reading this job description. It wasn't very long, but they had me at, this is a pretty cool job. All right. Managing social media accounts, developing food-based social media content, acting as the main point of contact for customers, reaching out and visiting new pizza restaurants, and facilitating billing and invoice needs.
Yeah. So that's going to be my answer to every one of your scenarios, probably.
I do kind of pick them that way.
All right. So one of my first students at Montana State, when I was a grad student, is one of my best friends now and lives close to me. And when he graduated with his undergrad in psych, he went to work for the National Restaurants Association in Chicago. And he essentially did something similar to this. He didn't do social media, but he basically did some curricular stuff. He did some other stuff around food safety, around all that stuff. He now is a VP doing stuff about geolocation in search engine optimization, and makes twice my salary. And is doing really well. And everything he does, and we talk, he asked me to consult on stats projects all this time, but everything he talks about is in his job is psych-based, just like this.
Yeah.
We have these skills that oral communication, written communication, whether it's social media, it's still written communication, right? You have you can name 17 different skills that we have in psychology that apply to this job that are taught. I will say not always taught. The skills are taught. The concepts of the skills are taught,
right?
In curriculum, not necessarily the doing of the skills. And I think I said this previously, that's the disconnect that we really focus on.
Right. I think about persuasion, because what the person needs to do is create these social media content that is persuasive. I also think about human development, understanding the audience that might be targeted by that particular campaign, whatever it might be. All right, let's just do one more. I think I like this one. All right. Special assistant to the division director, solutions coordinator. I love that. What is your job title? I'm a solutions coordinator. Participate in the development, implementation, coordination, and supervision of program goals, objectives, and activities. Honestly, I read that and I thought that sounds like a professor. That sounds like what we do. Supports the director by identifying and spearheading special problem-solving efforts. Produce analyses and prepare reports. Be an expert fact finder, a critical thinker, and a problem solver. And this is what we ask our students to do. Be a self-starter, be comfortable working independently as well as collaborating with others. I could go on and on. So I answered it for you. It's another yes. I'm going to tell you what I like. Let me see this one. So
it's yes, because you can talk about judgment, decision-making, creativity, which are all part of the cognitive domain, collaboration, which is part of the social domain, self-regulation, which is part of the personal domain, adaptability. I think that the interesting thing is that we say these are the skillful psychology students, but to be honest, there are other skills in other areas. Like biology has the same problem that we do. right? I recently took over as an associate director of STEM education, and I'm actually training learning assistants to be pedagogy experts to go into STEM classes and teach the professors how to have good pedagogy and to be the liaison between students, right? It's a whole model that was created at CU Boulder. And I was talking to my director, who's a biologist, and I asked her, I said, well, how many of your students go to grad school? And she's like, we don't know. And I said, well, are you teaching all this biology to them? And where do they go? What's the job they go into? And they're like, well, that's not really our focus. And I was just like, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they have a very similar situation in which, I mean, I think we're making better strides as a field towards solving this problem, but they're having the same issue too. And so in your job description that you just had, it's all in the Skillful Psychology Student.
Right.
It's all in almost any general core classes that are in a Psych Major or Human Development major. It's all there. It's just our job or our ability, as faculty to make that bridge for students that I really hope that we can work on.
I do. And I think we need to be cautious, though, and not think that we need to tell them, which is, the syllabus needs to include it. That's one way of communicating that to them. But we have to engage them in that discovery, that realization. And one of the most powerful assignments that I created, and I thought they're going to hate me for this, was go find bachelor's level jobs. And the class met on a Monday morning at 9, and I saw them come in, and there was a lot of chatter. I was like, oh gosh, it's going to be a mutiny. They're going to yell at me for this difficult assignment. It was the opposite. They were talking because they were so excited about what they found by just simply searching. And I have a rule. You cannot put anything in other than bachelor's degree. Right. You don't say Bachelor of Arts. You don't say Bachelor of Science. You don't say psychology, because if you do that, it's like any keyword search. It's going to limit what you see. And most employers don't put the major. They rarely put one major. If they list majors, it typically is around human services kind of work. They are expecting people with a variety of majors. Right. And so there are so many cool things. Back to the pizza job, I say, you like pizza. What a great job. Mix your passions, pizza and psychology, go for it. And I think that's true. There's people who get jobs in gaming as script writers. I saw that at an APA presentation one year at convention. They had someone talking about their job. Why? Because they understand personality and can create characters. Yeah. And so just thinking outside the box and not feeling like you have to uphold some unspoken rule that the only way your degree is valuable is if your job aligns directly with the way everyone else thinks your major is supposed to serve you when you're done. Because it is all about return on investment. You spent all that money, but you became instead. It's just really an unfair situation. We need to change that. I do want to go back one last thing before we say goodbye. We were talking about using the mapping coursework onto the Skillful Psychology Student skills. And you said, well, I don't think that students would be able to do that without the support and instruction of instructors. I actually disagree. I think that if students are listening, you can Google Skillful Psychology Student. As a matter of fact, I just have to type in skill. And because I search for it all the time, it automatically pops up. And look through that list of skills. And you can even look through your syllabi and look at the things that are already in them and say, well, what am I doing in this course that is going to help me develop some of these skills? And what are some courses that I should be taking to make sure that I'm continuing to develop skills that maybe are the ones I don't like as much and are harder for me, but I need to make sure that I do. So I do think students could do it to some degree, at least to become very familiar with it, because I worry about students who don't have faculty who are going to jump in right away and start doing these things for them. But they can take some ownership of that and at least start looking around. And looking at that document and looking at their courses from a different perspective, because I think a lot of instructors teach the content and a lot of students go in thinking this is a box of content. They are not thinking about the skills they're developing. So if they can think about their courses differently as well, even if they don't have someone guiding them through that process, I think that would be a really good thing for them to do.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I enjoyed this. I could go on for another hour, but we've been talking for quite a while.
No, it was a pleasure for sure.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.